Elspeth McLean is a former ODT health reporter, a role of some status in the newsroom, and she now writes a regular column when Moths Collide. She joins us this evening to tell us about her work. Good evening.
Good evening. First
of all, tell us about the name When Moths Collide. How did that come about?
People often ask me about that. In my first iteration as a columnist, I was called Mum's the Word, or the column was called Mum's the Word. And then I was dropped for a while, and then when I came back, they had to find a new name. And cut a long story short, someone near to me who shall remain nameless has described Moths Colliding as sort of my thought process. It's sort of like when you turn the lights off in a room, and if you listen very closely, you can hear the moths colliding, and every time the moths collide, that's a thought.
And do you take that as a compliment?
Well, no, I'm not. I thought it's probably not that far from the truth, really. But
now, your last column charted your communication with United future leader Peter Dunne. How did that communication unfold?
Oh, it's a bit of a long story, so I won't go into the ins and outs of it. But basically, the communication only involved a telephone conversation with Peter back in 2011, and in February this year, a very brief email conversation. It was to do with his stance on the Hobbit legislation. So just to suffice it to say that I don't think he'll have to answer any questions in Parliament about his relationship with me, and he won't be forced to say, I did not have text with that woman. So.
Now, you've had plenty of experience communicating with ministers. How has that gone for you?
Well, I think what people often don't realise, if you're not a journalist or you haven't had to do this sort of work, you probably don't realise that often we don't actually ever get to speak to the minister, or occasionally I got to speak to the minister, but most of the time you're dealing through the communications staff, and often it's by email, and it can be extremely frustrating because you don't get the answers you want and so on. So I became very practised at loud swearing in the newsroom.
Now, what do you have in store for readers in your next column?
Well, often I think about what I'm going to do a long way in advance, and I'm well prepared, but I have to say this week I'm not. Yeah, it'll be watch this space. Might be something about weather forecasting, or, yeah. It's difficult with the fortnightly column because, you know, some things that were topical a week ago aren't by the time it comes round.
Elspeth McLean, columnist for the ODT, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.